This podcast is brought to you by the North Dakota Petroleum Foundation. Communities across North Dakota can see big possibilities for education, infrastructure, conservation, and more. The state's oil and natural gas industry helps make them happen. North Dakota Oil and Natural Gas, advancing the possibilities. Learn more at ndpetroleumfoundation.org. Welcome to Plain Talk. My guest this episode is former State Treasurer Kelly Schmidt. Although you were State Treasurer for a long time, which of course if you hold that office, that also means you're a member of the State Investment Board. And there is a push in the legislature right now, and on previous episodes I've spoken with State Insurance Commissioner John Gottfried, who also has a seat on the State Investment Board, as well as State Representative Mike Nathy, Republican from Bismarck. They're proposing an idea that we would use the legacy fund to invest in North Dakota in basically two very broad categories. One would be capital made available for entrepreneurs, people who maybe want to expand their business or people who want to start a new business. There would be a fund of capital available for them to, obviously they would have to, make their pitch and have a good business plan and all that, but there would be a fund of capital available backstopped by the legacy fund to invest in that sort of thing. The other proposal would be, making it available, investing the legacy fund in bonds for infrastructure in the state, which is something the legacy fund is already used for in other parts of the world. It doesn't seem like a bad idea to maybe use it to invest in bonding our infrastructure in the state. But those two are making the affirmative argument for this idea, and someone who is not in favor of it is my guest, Kelly Schmidt. Kelly, how are you?
I'm doing well, Rob. Thank you.
Tell me why.
And I would.
Sorry, go ahead.
I wouldn't go as far to say that I'm opposed to it. This concept came forward to the State Investment Board. I think it was late last summer or early fall when the discussion happened, and I don't think there's anyone on the board then, including myself, or on the board now, that opposes investing in North Dakota. As a matter of fact, they're working on parameters on how to best put something together to work towards this. I think that's one of the misinformations that's being shared, is that the State Investment Board is giving a hard pushback. And it's my understanding, as it was when I was still on the board, that we need to do this cautiously and mindfully to make sure the parameters are set to do it wisely.
All right. So what's the problem with the bill that Representative Nathy is pushing?
Well, the biggest concern that I would have, if as a North Dakotan and as a member of the State Investment Board, is the fact that this bill changes the legal guidelines for trustees of investment portfolios by changing the prudent investor rule. I don't believe it's ever it's never good to make an exception to the prudent investor rule. It would make it very challenging. I mean, this is the governance structure of what all trustees are bound by. They have to look out for the best interest of beneficiaries, and this portion of the bill changes the core values of investing, or the governance structure of how the board makes decisions, and I have some real concerns with that.
Well, let's talk about that for a moment, because my understanding of the reason why the prudent investor rule is being changed, and maybe people who don't know, the prudent investor rule is essentially, it's written into our law, and it essentially says that we have to invest state money to get a good return, and we have to be smart about it. Understanding that any investment comes with risk. There are no zero risk investments, but we want to get a good return without being too risky. It's essentially that we have to find a balance. Now, the reason why that might need to be set aside for this proposal is because there's a different priority. I mean, typically if you have like a pension fund or something, you want to get as good a rate of return as you can feasibly. But in this instance, we have a different priority, and it's not necessarily getting a good rate of return, which you could probably do with a lot of investments outside of North Dakota. It's to say, well, we want to specifically invest this money, this percentage of the fund, and I think they're talking about 20% or something like that. They're saying that this percentage of the fund we want to invest in North Dakota, and that's our priority, and we're going to understand that that might not be the best available rate of return. Now, to me, that's just a trade-off. The legacy fund is not a pension fund. The point of the legacy fund is not to just grow it as fast as we can grow it. The point of the legacy fund is to use it for the legacy of North Dakota. So to do that, if we need to get around this idea that the rate of return needs to be the number one priority, what's so bad about that?
Well, I guess maybe that question needs to go back to the legislature, because they've been using the rate of return in every dollar of earnings that have come out of the legacy fund to balance the budget since they've been able to get their fingers on those dollars.
Yeah.
So they've used hundreds of millions of dollars to backfill the general fund in order to maintain the spending they have with their budget.
Okay, but
so
part of the problem.
You can't have your cake and eat it too, though.
Yeah.
You can't have your cake and eat it too.
But part of the problem is the legacy fund was created with no defined purpose at all. And understanding that for the first several years, the first 7 years, the intent was to grow the fund, but we're outside of that time window now. This is an enormous pot of money that's just sitting in government that, again, we have no defined purpose for. Of course it's going to get rated. The legislature's already rating it. I'm terrified that we're going to get some billionaire to fund some activist billionaire, or maybe a bunch of Hollywood activists or something like we've seen with past initiated measure, to fund some initiated measure, bamboozle the public, and spend the legacy fund on something that's very stupid. The time has come to start defining a use for this. I agree with you that the legislature's been rating the legacy fund, but maybe that would stop if we defined a purpose for it like this.
Well, and I can't agree with you more in the sense that, this the train left the station on that comment years ago, because the minute this thing was passed, the legislature should have been having the hearings that they just concluded to determine how this was going to be used moving forward. But I see the bill that's being discussed right now. This is economic development packaged as an investment. The legislature has every bit of authority to take earnings and put into a fund in the Bank of North Dakota and create an investment program or an economic development program without involving the State Investment Board. Now, the State Investment Board has already taken steps to see what this kind of program would look like. We've had people come in this fall, we had people come in from other states and give us presentations on how they manage and invest within their state, what the parameters look like. And the board continued to move this down the line, saying we need more information, we want more information, because the structure of how to do this is just as much, if not more important, than how much we do this. And that's what the board has been doing. We didn't have a meeting in December, so the last meeting I was part of was in November. I don't know what was discussed in January, but I do know that there are efforts, and they are bringing in experts on these topics to come in and see what this looks like. But I still think we have the Bank of North Dakota, which is a great asset to the state and has the skill set to be doing this. So why is the legislature putting the responsibility on the State Investment Board instead of creating their economic development program within the structure of Commerce or the Bank of North Dakota?
I think the legislature is taking the responsibility on themselves. That's and obviously the legislature hasn't acted yet. This is a proposed bill, but that's what this proposal would do: is the legislature taking some responsibility to define how we want to use the legacy fund and use it in a way that frankly I think addresses two of the chronic problems that have faced North Dakota since statehood, which one is access to capital, and two is diversifying our economy. I love our commodity, our agriculture and our energy, but they're commodity-based economies, and it would be nice to have those things thriving and growing and doing all those wonderful things, but also have a lot of other things too. We haven't had the capital. We have a giant pot of money in the legacy fund. What's wrong with investing it in ourselves? I don't understand the hostility to that. And
I hope I'm not hostile or feeling hostility towards this. What I'm saying is there's a mindset out there that the State Investment Board is against this concept, Whereas this bill just pushes the state investment board into a corner. The parameters of doing this and doing it well need to be carefully thought through and carefully put into place.
Well, then why can't that happen with this bill? I mean, the bill can be amended. I mean, there's a whole process that plays out with that.
Well, I guess when you legislate and you legislate an executive branch body, being the state investment board, to defer from core values of governance structure, meaning the prudent investor rule, to accommodate what you want to accomplish, that immediately puts a red flag up for me.
Well, the problem is because you're saying that the state investment board is not necessarily against investing in North Dakota, and yet currently it's less than 2%. I think it's like 1.2%. It's less than 2% of the legacy funds, billions, are invested in North Dakota. We have dozens of money managers, none of whom are from North Dakota. They're from all over the world, or all over the country. And we have investments that are frankly morally wrong in some places. I mean, we have investments in Chinese companies that are little more than puppets for the communist state. We're invested in we're literally invested in Vladimir Putin's regime in Russia. We're doing those investments, but we have less than 2% of the legacy fund invested in North Dakota. So if the state investment board had some desire to do this, then why didn't they do it?
Rob, that's a question that we ask many managers that come in. Do you have investments in North Dakota? And many of them do not. We also have had entities from the state ask us, how do we become part of the state investment process? And we have given them every bit of information and given them every opportunity to go through the governance structure to be a company that we would consider or a company that we would do business with. And I have yet to hear of any North Dakota business that has followed through with that opportunity. Not only would that give them an opportunity to do business in North Dakota, but it would also give them an opportunity to do business with any one of the states or public funds that our consultant works with. So there's so many ideas that are out there, but the most important thing is to have the foundation and the structure of how we do this. And that's why we've been reaching out to other states to see, what did you do right? What did you do wrong? How would you do this differently?
But is it the obstacle, the very prudent investor rule that you're talking about? I mean, investing in North Dakota may mean foregoing an investment somewhere else in the world that could probably get a couple points more in rate of return. I mean, in order to do what we're talking about here, we kind of have to reshuffle our priorities and say, okay, well, priority number one is we want to make capital available for North Dakota infrastructure projects and North Dakota economic development. And then the rate of return we get is secondary. You can't do that with the prudent investor rule in place as it is.
And that's why I would suggest that the legislature vote to use a portion of the principal or a portion of the earnings that they've been backfilling the general fund with, and create a fund separate and put aside that gives them the opportunity through the fiscal portion of the Bank of North Dakota, and use that as a vehicle, and have the State Investment Board continue as the fiduciary listed in the Constitution to continue to invest the state investment.
Why is that preferable to what Representative Nathy is proposing?
Because my concern is if something comes in and the structure of this is legislated and not given the full vetting opportunity that is necessary to create a program like this, that it's going to come back and bite not only the State Investment Board, but the people of North Dakota, because the earnings that the legislature is accustomed to having may not be there. And then it's going to come back and bite us all in the rear end.
Well, isn't that a good thing? I mean, I don't think we want the legislature balancing the budget with the legacy fund. That's not what the legacy fund. The legacy fund wasn't intended to protect the legislature from having to make tough budget decisions.
I agree with you. So then have them make the vote and not backfill the dollars. Have them take the $400 million that's projected to be available from the legacy fund earnings and put that $400 million into a fund to pay interest on a bonding bill, as I've been hearing that discussion in the. There's other opportunities, but to legislate and force the State Investment Board to go against the core principles of what the law of the land. I mean, the prudent investor rule isn't just for North Dakota. It's for every trustee and every fund across the country. And I think that's the biggest concern.
But
for,
the legacy
for me
fund's
and for
not
some
like
others.
the legacy fund's not like these other funds. I mean, again, it's not a pension fund.
I agree with you. It's not a pension fund, but that doesn't make a trustee have to be any less prudent and make undue risk.
But is it undue
risk? A
risk?
dollar is a dollar.
I don't understand. I mean, we're making it sound like these are investments in North Dakota. These are investments in North. I mean, if we're talking about the infrastructure part of it, these are investments in building infrastructure cheaper and faster than we could if we had to finance some of these projects in other ways. That's a benefit to North Dakota. If we have to give up a few points on the return of the legacy fund, isn't that a good trade?
It depends on the parameters. It's easy to sit on the outside and look in and say, well, the state investment board should do this, because the board sits and does all the due diligence and asks all the questions and brings in all the discussion and has all this. To just throw and say, you need to do this it's not prudent. There's opportunities for the state investment board, as we do now, to invest in infrastructure. Granted, it's not North Dakota infrastructure, but they're looking at ways on how to do that. The state investment board right now, as I mentioned, for the last several months, has been looking for a way to lay out the parameters to set things into place.
But isn't that, because that's Commissioner John Gottfried, who's on the board. I mean, he got that ball rolling. I mean, it wasn't until, and he's backing this bill, that Representative Nathy, but he's the one who got that ball rolling on the board. They weren't doing anything this vein. I would say that
Commissioner Gottfried is more concerned about the dollar amounts than he is about setting the parameters of how we need to do this. And as a person who sat on that board for 16 years, for me, it was all the devil's in the details, and it's how you do something and how you structure it, and the opportunities that come. You have to be prudent, and you can't be concerned about all the noise outside of the decision process that you're making, because that changes your decisions, and then you're not being a good trustee and you're not being prudent.
The one thing that I'm not understanding is what specifically is imprudent about what's being proposed in the legislature.
Because it would be just like the state investment board would be forced to invest only in one structure. There would be no diversification in this portfolio. It would be just like years ago, the legislature, there was a bill that came in and said, we couldn't invest in firearms, or you had to divest from different things, and it was divest from Iran and divest from diamonds, and there's been so many other things saying you can't invest in them. And you know what? We worked to get those bills killed too, because the fact remains you can't just cherry pick. The diversification is what makes a portfolio grow. You can visit with any investor in any fund. And that's why it's so very important to have good quality companies in well-diversified areas. And granted, we want to increase, or the State Investment Board, I believe, wants to increase their exposure to North Dakota, but not to do it at a loss or a concern of, it's just like what's happening right now with oil. All the rules just changed. And if we were completely and totally invested in oil, if the legacy fund was completely invested in oil, what would happen to the earnings then when all of a sudden your revenue sources changed and your earnings opportunities have gone south?
The proposal at hand, though, is not a complete. We're not talking about investing all of the legacy fund. It's a percentage of the legacy fund. It's 20%. 80% could continue to be invested in Vladimir Putin and all the other ways that the State Investment Board has approved. 20% would be for North Dakota. So I think we're being a little bit facetious by suggesting that we're going to put all our eggs in one basket. Well, that's not true. We're going to take some of the eggs and say these eggs are for North Dakota, and those other eggs, I guess, can still be for Vladimir Putin.
And I do think there's a way, and you know what, that's just plain. There's a way to put a portfolio of North Dakota into the current structure and the current guidelines of the prudent investor rule, and to be able to do what needs to be done. It just needs the timing to do that. But to have the legislature, when they have full opportunity to vote, and with the 25% of the vote, they can take a structure of the principle. And in essence, that's what they're doing here, is they're shifting the principle from what the people voted on in the constitutional aspect of it. And they're shifting those dollars, because that would truly become principal once it was deposited. They're shifting those dollars into a North Dakota fund. So then let it go through the Bank of North Dakota and the channels in which they have used previously. The bank also has a large amount of profits that could be used for this too. Why isn't there part of bank profits and part of North Dakota legacy profits? Why hasn't the bank ever been mandated to do something like this?
I mean, maybe we should, but the bank also has never had the bank has never had profits on the scale of what the legacy fund's principal represents. And again, I think this is about defining a purpose for something. There's also a bill in the legislature that would use the legacy fund to abolish property taxes, which seems foolish to me for a number of reasons, not least of which is that, if we're going to decouple people from the cost of their local government and use this fund we have, I don't think that would end well for North Dakota. But those sort of proposals are floating out there. If we don't define a purpose for the legacy fund, someone else is going to do it for us. And I don't think we're going to like what they do, Kelly. This, to me, makes sense. This isn't spending the legacy fund. This is a way we're investing the legacy fund. And the only thing it's going to cost us is it might not get as good. It's still going to get a return. It might not get as good a return if we invested it in Minnesota or somewhere.
Well, and I think, too, as we continue to, it's all in the details, Rob. There isn't anyone that's arguing with you that we shouldn't have investment in North Dakota. It's all in the details. And I would hope, instead of a legislative mandate, that the legislature allows the State Investment Board to continue to go through the process, instead of having to change core value rules of investing in order to get what they want.
I don't think there's a lot of trust that the State Investment Board wants to do this. And in fact, most of the criticism I hear of the State Investment Board is that they're rubber stamps for whatever these money managers tell them to do.
Boy, that's not true. I've never been a rubber stamp. And I know there's a lot of folks on the board that spend a lot of time in their due diligence and ask a lot of questions. We have an amazing staff in the Retirement and Investment Office who work with our consulting firm, who set the parameters, and they start with, sometimes 200 companies, work down to, 10, do due diligence on those 10, the final 3 get the continued scrutiny. And by the time it comes to the board, some of this, it's taken a year or more to get all the structure and due diligence done before it even comes to the board. So the fact that we rubber stamp, I don't think anybody rubber stamps, because we ask some pretty tough questions. And I think the other side of it is the most frustrating thing for me in the 16 years that I sat on the legacy or on the State Investment Board is the lack of understanding between what the public understands that the board does and what the legislature understands what the board does. And I think education is going to be the number one thing that can address all of these frustrations, because we're all on the same team. We are all working for the best interests of North Dakota, and there isn't anyone that's pushing back. I would say that one of the biggest fallbacks on this is when Commissioner Gottfried came out with this. He had an agenda, and instead of working through the process and the governance structure of the State Investment Board, he walked in and threw it on the table, and it was disappointing to all of us. I mean, we're sitting in a boardroom, and all of a sudden a press release has already gone out. There wasn't even an opportunity for conversation. So I think a whole lot of things came down that a lot of people aren't aware of. And it's not that anyone was pushing back or pushing away. It was just caught everyone by surprise.
I don't know how you make a proposal without making the proposal. I mean, there's always a day where prior to that day, the proposal didn't exist, and then the proposal existed. I'm glad Commissioner Gottfried put this on the table, and in fact, that was the impetus for what you've been talking about for the State Investment Board to start looking at investing money in North Dakota, because that wasn't happening before he proposed what he proposed. And I want to just absolutely clear, because we talked about this a little bit before we started recording, but it is something that many people, and I want to give you a chance to dispel the rumor, but people have said that you were possibly going to take a job with one of the money managing firms that had worked for the State Investment Board now that you're out of office. You told me off air that's not true. I'll let you say it again.
That is not true. That is a lie. My plan as of right now and from my last day in office is to take 6, 9, 12 months off completely with just spending time with my family and my husband. And if God has a plan for me moving forward, I may be open to that. But there are no offers on the table. There have been no discussions for me to work moving forward. And whoever is creating that hum is absolutely lying.
All right. Well, that's why I asked the question. So I wanted to give you a chance to respond to that. Anything else, I guess, as we wrap this conversation up? I know there's a lot of passionate feelings, and I will tell you, when I've looked at some of the ways, and let's talk about that. I've made reference to it a few times. It really bothers me that we have money invested in some of these companies in communist China, in some of these places in the world that are not very good places, and yet we're investing North Dakota's money there. I know you don't like the idea of the legislature micromanaging things, but can't we all agree we don't need to be investing in Vladimir Putin? I mean, I don't think that's a controversial thing. I'll
tell you what, for you to single out one entity, I would really challenge anyone that has a 401k or a mutual fund of any sort to drill down and to truly see what the minutia is in those investments. And they would be surprised by where some of those dollars are invested.
Yeah.
The fact that, to single out and to try and sensationalize the investments of the State Investment Board with Putin in China is just that, sensationalizing it, because there's never been an effort to invest in certain things that we as North Dakotans would feel would be wrong.
But now that you're aware of them, do we just accept it?
When you are investing in international funds and you're investing in countries that are growing and have opportunity, I mean, we have investments in Singapore, and yes, there are investments in China. Emerging markets, that's where you need to be. And as long as the funds that are managed by the State Investment Board, meaning the Legacy Committee, the PERS Committee, the Teachers Fund for Retirement Committee, Workforce Safety, they set the asset allocation, meaning we want so much of a percentage in this pot and so much percentage in this pot, and it's the role of the State Investment Board to allocate the dollars in that. And if emerging markets is part of that, then yes, China is going to be a piece of it because it's a big part of the emerging market group.
But we are specifically invested in companies that are used by the communist state for censorship, to censor things like the Hong Kong pro-democracy. We are invested in companies that are defined by the U.S. State Department as a risk to U.S. security.
And I'm not familiar with that, Rob, so I can't comment on that. And I don't have access to that information any longer.
Okay. Well, it's public record, so we all have access to it. And you're right. I mean, maybe we're not looking close enough at this, and maybe people would be surprised at some of their ways that their 401k is invested, but I think we should be aware of that stuff. These are public dollars. I mean, there are individuals out there that probably wouldn't like to invest in gun companies. I don't agree with that, but they can handle their investments that way. When we're talking about state dollars, that's all of our dollars. And, I don't know. I look at some of these investments and I'm just like, this is immoral. This is not right.
Well, I guess I would ask too then, just as the State Investment Board invests the dollars that are in the pension funds and the legacy funds, the Bank of North Dakota does investing of the general fund, and they do the investing of the assets of the Bank of North Dakota. And I would bet that they're invested in some of the same things that you're questioning relating to the State Investment Board.
You're probably right. That doesn't make it okay. But you're probably right.
Well, and it just is, when you're limited and you're in certain asset allocations and you're limited, it is challenging.
Well, I hope it's something that changes, and I hope it's something that the State Investment Board is willing to do something about. But historically, it seems like they don't want to move on much of this type of stuff. Because again, I don't think that returns should be always our number one goal. If it's a choice between getting a good return or taking a slightly less return because we're not going to invest in a company that censors people for the Chinese government, I'm willing to take that trade-off. And if we're going to lose a little bit of return by investing in North Dakota to help North Dakota businesses and to help North Dakota communities build the infrastructure they need, I'm okay with that trade-off. I don't think that's controversial.
And I believe as long as you do your due diligence and do the very best to your ability with the information that's in front of you, then you're doing your best work. You should never be chasing returns. You should never be chasing. You have to take a look at the whole picture when you are investing and not pinpointing and pointing fingers. I mean, I've had legislators say to me, well, we need this much money coming out of that legacy fund this biennium to batch vote. This is what we need. And I just smile at them and say, you're going to get what you get because we're doing our jobs.
Kelly, thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, Rob. Take care.